Fantasy Show. I am Nathan Stubbs and I'm here joined by the best co-host anybody could have. It's Chris Leach. How's it going, Chris?
I'm very well, Nathan, very well. So welcome one and all to the League of Champions podcast. So this is something that's grown out of a fantasy league that we've run for the last 16 years. We've podcasted about it, really our own league to ourselves for such a long time, but we're going to take some of that experience that we've had about talking about fantasy NFL, because that is what we talk about here, from an entirely new British perspective, and bring it to you. So the game is increasing in popularity so much over here. If you're an American listener, you really have to just look at the London games that we have here every year to show that there's a massive fan base, and I think that from our perspective, we're fans that can bring you something a little bit different. So that's what we're going to aim to do. We're going to aim to talk to all things fantasy, but bring it to a level that's understandable. So there's so many publications and websites and whatnot out there that sometimes it's quite difficult to get your thoughts together and get your team together for a particular week. So we're here to help decipher that in the only way that we know that we can, which isn't necessarily through statistics and numbers, but it is through the eye. And we've always said, and this will continue to be the motto of what we do here. So don't necessarily look at the stats. Stats are important, but always watch the games, because the more that you watch the games, the more that you know the players, and the more that you can make an informed decision. So it's always very interesting to me when you watch matches, whether that be in any sport, whether that be in American football, whether that be an association football that some folks wrongly call soccer. That occasionally there are chances that just go astray that the statistics don't pick up, and those are the opportunities that you miss. So we're here to break that down for you. We're going to be here every week,
twice a week, hopefully.
We hope. Absolutely. So without further ado, let's just talk about what we're going to do in this episode.
Yeah, sure. So we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna have probably 2 episodes a week. We'll normally have a Friday episode. This is going to be the Friday episode on Wednesday, so the weekend is nearly here. Congrats. Each episode we'll talk to you about some news, but the Friday episode we'll obviously do the main game previews. We'll go slate by slate. Talk about the players we like in a particular game, don't like. As Chris said, we're not going to dive too much into the numbers. There's lots of good outlets and podcasts that already do a great job of that. So we're going to give you a more qualitative perspective, shall we say, a fun one, obviously, from a fan's perspective. If you have any questions you would like to submit for a particular game, please do submit them, and we will aim to read out 1 question per game on the slate. After that, we'll tell you our Kings and Peasants of the week. Each week, me and Chris are going to pick our favourite players at each position and our least favourite players at each position. Someone we think is going to overperform or have a great week, and someone who's going to underperform. We'll match up our teams each week based on standard fantasy scoring and see how we do, because the important thing, Chris, that really irks us is that a lot of fantasy analysts and things are out there, and they'll tell you what to do, and it feels like they have absolutely no accountability on the advice that they give, because they give advice to a lot of fantasy people, listeners and leagues, and they just do it for a living. We're doing it for fun. We want to help you win your leagues. We care about whether you do well, so don't listen to them, listen to us, or at least listen to the one of us who wins this little game of competition we're going to have between each other. And then we're going to finish with a little bit of fun, 20 questions. So each week we will alternate. There will be a player that we each have to guess by, you guessed it, asking 20 questions, and then we'll talk about that player a little bit at the end as well. It will always be a fantasy or notable player, shall we say, on offense, defense, or special teams. That's the Friday shows. On the Tuesday shows, we'll obviously do recaps and again, obviously, news that happened from the games themselves. We'll obviously see how me and Chris did with the Kings and Peasants. Each week, as well as another bit of fun, we're going to put a player into the League of Champions and also a player into the League of Donkeys. That is who we think is the best player or the best performance of the week, and the worst or the most disappointing one. And at the end of the season, we'll pick our winner of each league. We'll give you some advice for waivers, and obviously preview the Thursday night game as well. How does that all sound to you, Chris?
I think that sounds very comprehensive, and I hope that you enjoy what we're doing here, because Nate's exactly right. We're only here to help you win your league. So without further ado, let's talk to you about some of the things that have been happening in and around the league in the news.
So, Chris, what's going on in the NFL at the moment?
Well, many things as it turns out, and the season hasn't started yet. So we should probably start the news section with the very unfortunate news of Ricky Pearsall, the San Francisco rookie, being shot in San Francisco over a Rolex. It's one of those awful things that you hear and say for somebody who comes in with quite high expectations. What do you make of that, Nath?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we all know gun violence is a horrible epidemic in America at the moment, but specifically we'll just keep it about fantasy and everything here. Yeah, it's tragic. I think he was doing some sort of team event, which led him to be in the situation where he did get shot. Luckily, it was, I think, through the shoulder kind of area, so not too serious. Unfortunately for Ricky Pearsall, he's already been having shoulder issues this off-season, stemming from when he played at college. I believe it is to the other shoulder, so it's not exacerbating that. However, any gunshot injury does probably mean you're going to miss some sort of time. If you remember back to Brian Robinson's rookie season, he had actually a very similar event happen. He had a gunshot wound to the leg, but he ended up playing that year. Now, granted, this only obviously happened literally within the last week or so it's going to take him a little bit of time to come back. So he will be back and playing at some point. He has been placed on the NFI list, so he almost certainly will miss a few games. And if you've got a reserve spot in your fantasy league, you should be able to put him on that. Just generally, obviously, Chris, he's not necessarily profiled to have much fantasy impact this season. It would probably take an injury to Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel or something like that for him to become relevant, but we obviously wish him well and hope he gets his rookie campaign on track sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I say always one of the worst things to hear. Yep. So moving swiftly on, then, say this is something that's certainly more fantasy relevant for anybody out there who is an Isaiah Pacheco owner. This Chiefs this week have signed Samaje Perine. If you've been the Joe Mixon owner in Cincinnati for some years, you will know the pain that Samaje Perine brings you, or at least a headache. What do you think of that, Nath?
Well, I think forget about even if you were a Joe Mixon owner, if you were Isaiah Pacheco owner when Jerick McKinnon was blowing up, that was also pretty frustrating. I think that was his rookie year. I mean, yeah, it's a worry because Pacheco had a really good season last year. He's not the most durable of backs. He has a very aggressive running style, and that does lend himself to getting nicked up. So the Chiefs obviously could look to spread the load around a little bit just to keep him a bit fresher. Now, he's only just signed with the team, but they're sort of already talking up his pass catching ability. It's, too soon to say, is he going to have Samaje Perine fantasy relevance himself? But he does profile to, fill in that Jerick McKinnon role. But yeah, it's a potential cap on Pacheco's upside. I wouldn't be too worried at the moment, but Pacheco's still going to be a fine option. But yeah, it might just cap his upside.
Yeah, it's a strange running back room there in Kansas City because obviously we're expecting high things of Pacheco this season, and I think a lot of you out there will have drafted Pacheco reasonably highly in your leagues this year. But we can't forget that Clyde is still hanging around. Carson Steele has a role to play. Again, talking his ability up as well. So, do you think that Pacheco will still have that significant value in obviously quite a high-powered offense?
Oh yeah, to start the season for sure. I mean, you never know. Like if Perine shows some chops with the pass catching role, they could take that element or a bit of that element away from Pacheco. But I can't see a scenario where he's not at least a rock solid running back 2, if not some form of running back 1. So yeah,
absolutely. Talking about number 1 and certainly in some leagues he may well have gone number one overall. Jamar Chase, a strange offseason. We've seen it in the past. I remember a league many years ago where Le'Veon Bell did this and then held out for the season. I don't think it will quite be in that way, but Jamar Chase is still not practicing as of today, albeit it did get kitted up in practice today. Do you think there's going to be an issue there? Will he play week one?
At this stage, it's like you said, it sounds like he's kitted up, which is more than he has been doing. He's been in street clothes. But today is the day, Wednesday, depending when you're listening, when players really kind of need to be in practice, because that's when they're really starting to install the game plans and things. And obviously he's been sitting out a while, sitting out away from the team. He needs to get some reps in. You know, the hits that NFL players take, it takes some adjusting to, shall we say. So if he has suited up today, you're right, Chris, I saw that report too. If he is indeed practicing and he's not continuing his hold in, he will probably be out there in week one. He might not be on a full complement of snaps, but I think against what should be a fairly beatable opponent in New England, he would still be entirely usable, even if he was slightly limited. So definitely still watch this space. He still wants that contract, but yeah, I would imagine at this point he'll be out there.
So talking about contract rebels on the West Coast, Brandon Ayuk has finally signed his contract extension, $120 million extension, and that will only improve their team. He was one of the most efficient receivers in the league last year, whilst also on offense. Trent Williams has ended his holdout too. How do you think that will impact the 49ers going into the season?
It's massive for the 49ers. They did these contracts at the right time, specifically Ayuk. He signed last week at this point, so it means he's obviously been able to get back in the facility, get practicing again. So he might still not be fully up and running week one. His snaps might still be limited a little bit, but he'll be out there. But I think more important for the Niners is they got this Trent Williams situation sorted, because he is an amazing left tackle. He is really important to that offense and making the skilled position players be able to do what they can do. Now, he did just end his holdout today, but to be honest with him, he's a veteran of the league and things. I wouldn't be worried about him obviously being out there and playing. So, yeah, they should be all systems go against the Jets this week.
Super, and they'll definitely need it. So we've seen Brock Purdy's ascension to being a very, very efficient, not only fantasy quarterback but real life quarterback too. And Trent Williams is a massive part of that. So I totally agree. Yeah. Another Williams, just down there in Los Angeles, Kyren Williams returning punts. This is not what anybody wants to see. If you've drafted Kyren Williams in the first round with Rico Dowdle no longer returning the punts. You just don't know what Sean McVay's going to do, but yeah, do you think that that's going to be a timeshare? Do you think that Rico Dowdle is going to be the favourite to lead in carries, and Kyren Williams is going to be to bench to one side?
Yeah, well, let's take Kyren Williams first. So yeah, I think Sean McVay also must have forgotten some things, because he must have forgotten that Kyren Williams injured his ankle on the opening kickoff of the 2022 season. I think it was, not last year, the year before, and missed most of the season, if not all of it. I can't quite remember. But yeah, it's a bit of a head scratcher. But the Rams also seem to be playing some games, because they've also said that Blake Corum is supposedly going to be returning kickoffs. So Kyren Williams is a good play. You know, he's suited to that role. I wouldn't worry too much in terms of the role. Blake Corum absolutely is a threat to his workload, but there is no scenario really, I think, where he's not the starting running back. So we'll just have to see what happens in week one for that. For Rico Dowdle, yeah, it's the opposite. While McVay's doing one thing, Mike McCarthy's doing another. So Dowdle's getting taken off special teams. They're sort of talking him up a bit that he'll be getting a bit more of a role. It's going to be a committee, like you said, probably, Chris, with Zeke, and obviously they've signed Dalvin Cook either to the active roster or the practice squad now as well. But he's supposedly the favourite to lead carries, Dowdle. I think if you watched any of the Cowboys last season, he did have a bit of pop to his game, obviously playing behind Tony Pollard, and he's never handled a big workload. But I don't know, I think I'd probably rather have Rico Dowdle going into the season than Elliott at this point. We sort of know what Elliott is, and he's obviously sort of on the back nine of his career, and yeah, obviously them taking him off punts, of Dowdle off punts, that is potentially a good sign for his workload.
Absolutely. And say the moving on from Zeke, as we saw last season, was relatively effective, especially for fantasy. Tony Pollard was absolutely fantastic coming out of the traps. So I think there's it's going to be a big year for Rico Dowdle if the same workload applies there. And say two guys that maybe is a bit mid-round picks in your drafts, Kyle Pitts and Romeo Dobbs. Kyle Pitts come out with a hamstring injury today, which the guy can't catch a break. If it's not a bad offense, that it's his body letting him down. And then Romeo Dobbs, again, in quite a condensed Green Bay receiving core. So there's a lot of guys with talent there. What do you think of the outcomes for those guys starting the season?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, firstly, Pitts can't catch a break after he had that great rookie season going for 1,000 yards. It's just not really happened for him again since. Midweek hamstring injuries are never a good thing. Certainly not when they pop up as a limited participant with it, because it probably means that they suffered the injury during practice. So, if you're a Pitts owner right now, I would be at least thinking about your backup options if you don't already have one on your team. Because hamstring injuries can obviously be multiple week things. So definitely watch the practice reports over the next couple of days just to see how severe it is. But get your next tight end up in order. For Romeo Dobbs, it's a hand contusion, which is a bruise. I don't know why I'm saying contusion because we're a British podcast. It's a hand bruise. Come on, America. He's got a hand bruise, which doesn't sound too serious on the face of it. Obviously, we don't really know, I think, the severity of the bruise. So again, just check the injury reports. That's obviously more playable, though obviously quite problematic as a receiver that catches the ball. Just keep an eye on it. You probably weren't, depending on your league format, counting on him week one anyway. Just keep an eye on it before you roll him out there if you were going to do so. Okay, that's it for the news this week. Let's get to the game previews. So we are, of course, going to start off with Thursday Night Football, the opening kickoff, which is happening on Thursday, 5th of September, Chris, between the Kansas City Chiefs, the reigning Super Bowl champions, and the Baltimore Ravens. So what we're going to do, we'll go team by team, position by position, we'll just give you our breakdown of each team, so each player. So for Kansas City, a quarterback, I think we should start off strong on this podcast, Chris. We're trying to help people win their fantasy championships. You should absolutely bench Patrick. No, I'm not going to say you should bench Patrick Mahomes. Don't even think about it. We don't need to talk about quarterback for the Chiefs. You got him, you play him. Running back, Pacheco, it's the same, right? I don't think there's really anyone else at this stage you'd be interested in fantasy-wise after that for week one. We'll see what P. Ryan does, like we said in the new section. Receivers, obviously Rashee Rice is out there. You're probably, I presume, happy enough to boot him up if you've got him, Chris.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I would boot him up. Absolutely no problem. Obviously, with this as well, your second receiver here for the Chiefs, Xavier Worthy, is more like a wide receiver 3 in this offense because we see Kelsey probably being the effective wide receiver 1 in the world of fantasy. Even though he's a tight end, he has a significant value as a receiver. With Rashee Rice as probably your 1 equal or possibly 2 in this offense, but he gives you something different. So I think that the only real fantasy starters here for consideration, as Nathan mentioned, Mahomes at quarterback, Pacheco, Rashee Rice, and Travis Kelsey. I wouldn't even start Xavier Worthy as a flex, but I don't know about you.
Yeah, depending how deep your format is, if you're like a 14 or a 16 team league, he might squeak in there at the end. But I mean, especially with Marquise Brown being out, so he's obviously injured in the preseason. Worthy does profile to potentially have a role, but there's been talk as a rookie he might not be ready. So like you say, Chris, if you have other options, probably better to go that way for week one. That's pretty much it for the Chiefs. Obviously, if you've got Bucker, you can play him. Probably want to go elsewhere if you've got the Chiefs D. We'll go over to Baltimore. Obviously, again, Lamar Jackson, you're obviously playing him. Derrick Henry, obviously playing his first game as a Baltimore Raven. Yeah, shares the same birthday as you, in fact, doesn't he, Chris? So
that is a strange fact.
Yeah.
Not just the same birthday, but the exact same birthday as well. So, if you want to check out what birthday that is.
Yeah.
Search up Henry.
Yeah, everybody on the internet knows your date of birth now, Chris. Congrats. Play him, no problem. No other running backs for the Ravens you should be considering here in week 1. Receiver-wise, obviously Zay Flowers, yeah, he's absolutely playable, and you should probably play him if you've got him this week. Probably not anybody in the receiver room after that. Obviously, similar to Kansas City, the Baltimore love a tight end as well, so Mark Andrews should be starting for you if you've got him this week, certainly if you're in a tight end a format that forces you to start a tight end. There could be a little bit of pop potentially from Rashad Bateman because he's sort of the clear number 2, but again, there's got to be better options on your team, I think, than Rashad Bateman this week, Chris.
I would think so, and say in much the same way as you mentioned, they have Mark Andrews there for Baltimore, who much like Kelsey is a target hog, especially in PPR, is an excellent candidate as well because he's just that safety net. But I think you're right. Zay Flowers tracks to have an excellent season. So we saw a lot of him last season. Yes, he's a small body guy, but he gets around the field so well, and has a safe pair of hands as well. And I think that the more that relationship flourishes between Jackson and Flowers, the more you're going to see. I think anybody who drafted him will see some benefit this year, especially last year has been his rookie year as well. So with a whole season in the league already, I think that could be some value there. Say in our draft as well as others, he was certainly a later round mid round pick in our 12-team league. I think 2 very, very even teams. But for me, you can't go wrong with Kansas City at home.
No, yeah, it's the opening game, time to celebrate. So yeah, will be interesting to watch that game. Pretty cut and dry for fantasy too. Not a lot really to discuss. So next game we've got there was a Friday game in opening weekend this year because it is the Green Bay Packers taking on the Philadelphia Eagles in Brazil. On Friday night. So we'll start off on the Green Bay side of the board, Chris. Again, Jordan Love. Probably a starter if you've got him in your fantasy teams because you would have needed a mid-round pick probably to secure him, maybe a bit later if you fell a bit in your draft. So again, it's the Philly defense, it wobbled a little bit last year, so if they come in struggling a little bit, Love could have a decent game, but you've got the wild card of it being an international game, of which we obviously love being in the UK and going to a fair few ourselves. But yeah, Love's a solid option for week 1. Josh Jacobs, he's just going to get an absolute ton of volume here because Marshawn Lloyd, he's a bit banged up at the moment. Obviously, AJ Dillon, he's on IR now. He won't play the season, so play Jacobs with confidence. He's going to get a lot of volume. Receivers, it's a busy receiver room for Green Bay, isn't it, Chris? Anything could happen with this receiver room. Obviously, Jaden Reed sort of profiles as the top option. Again, depending where you drafted him, he might be a starter for you, but he's not necessarily a default starter for me this week, Chris. I don't know what you think.
No, I don't think that we know enough about the usage of the Green Bay receivers to accurately tell you. Yeah. Who's going to be their outright number 1? Because say Christian Watson's still hanging around there. Bags of talent as we saw last season as well. But again, you look there, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. We talked about Dobbs' injury earlier on in the news, and Dontavian Wicks is still there too. So all 4 guys that are much for muchness, and Luke Musgrave at tight end as well, who you shouldn't shirk because he had a use last season too. But I think for receivers, let's see how week 1 goes before we start making assumptions about what they're going to do with usage.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice, Chris. Take a wait and see approach with these Green Bay receivers if you can, and then go from there. So that's pretty much it on that side of the ball. Wouldn't probably play, probably not the kicker or their defense either against Philly. So we'll go and take a look at Philadelphia. Again, Jalen Hurts is obviously starting if you've got him. Saquon Barkley's first game for the Eagles as well. Again, absolutely play him if you have him. Don't think about any other running backs for the Eagles. Receiver-wise, again, play A.J. Brown. play Devontae Smith. Again, it's pretty cut and dry. You don't need to worry about anybody else beyond that, I think, Chris. And Dallas Goedert, he's sort of on the borderline, I think, for the tight ends. Now, in tight end only leagues, he's obviously a guy that was probably drafted, possibly not. But again, similar to kind of what you said there, Chris, with the Green Bay receivers, I'd maybe take a little bit of a wait and see approach with the Seagulls offense here with Dallas Goedert in week 1.
I totally agree and say this Eagles offense and playing in Brazil should be well suited to them, because they say Jalen Hurts is the absolute Samba quarterback. He can do it all. He's got flair. He's perfect for that game. And I think with this offense this year, you look at it there, Saquon, this could be the making of him. Finally, the shackles are off after many years of being in a bad offense. And their receiver core, especially the three that will start in Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dotson, very deep. You go below that, and you've seen guys like Paris Campbell, who has been fantasy relevant in the last few years with the Colts. So I think that combined with the Kellen Moore offense, because mustn't forget that's the offensive coordinator this year.
Yep.
And that's going to be an extremely potent offense. I think if you've got any of those skill positions for the Eagles in your team, you should fire them up, provided they are Hurts, Barkley, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and probably Dallas Goedert, probably. With confidence.
There you go. Jake Elliott, though, I would say don't play. I don't really understand why he was fairly ranked highly in kicker rankings anyway as fantasy goes, because we know the Eagles historically anyway are a team that kind of like to be quite aggressive and go for it on fourth and try and get those touchdowns. So obviously it's a fairly good offense, so they do get in the positions, but they're one of these annoying offenses where in sort of kicking situations they don't always take it. So I'd probably look elsewhere for kicker and defense. You could use the Eagles defense depending where you're at. It's not the best matchup, is it, Chris? But they're usable if you've not got anything better, I'd say.
I agree. I don't think because of the weirdness of all these international games, that's what we find is that there's just anomalies you don't really expect. I think Green Bay can be better than people expect, but I do think that Philly are going to win this game, because you look at Green Bay's offense. It's a young offense. It's somewhat untested, especially in that environment. And we've seen Jordan Love, especially towards the end of last season, really grow into the ascendancy. But can he carry that on into year 2? That is the key thing for us, and I think that we've seen enough that he can, but there's always that question mark, and you certainly don't have that with Jalen Hurts. So for me, it's Philly all day long.
Yeah. We'll go on to our next game now. So Pittsburgh, Atlanta. So that we're moving on to the Sunday slate now. Let's start off looking at Pittsburgh. So quarterback, I really hope you have a better option than Russell Wilson, who's going to start for the Steelers in week 1, because I would not recommend playing him. He should, hopefully he's going to get his career back on track in the Steelers after what was obviously a bit of a bumpy ride there in Denver, but don't be rolling him out there for week 1, I'd say. The running backs, though, however, Najee Harris and probably Jalen Warren as well, Chris. I like both of them. They're not necessarily the best options this week, but I think that they're usable, certainly flex-worthy at the minimum. After Smith profiles to want to run the ball a lot, obviously hide potentially the quarterback situation, so I think you can use those guys. Would not surprise me if he trolls us all and somehow mixes in Cordarrelle Patterson, just like he did in Atlanta.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Receiver George Pickens. Again, if you've got him, you could probably start him, but again, I don't know. I think I don't know how you feel on it, Chris. I'd maybe, if you've got someone you drafted later on, like possibly like a Jerome Ford or a Chuba Hubbard, one of these running backs who's going later figures to get a decent early season role at least, or another maybe receiver with a little bit of pop this week, I'd maybe look to play them over Pickens, just because we don't really know how this passing game is going to shake out. He's going to be the top receiver, isn't he, for sure, Chris? But it's just how much confidence do you have in this Steelers passing game?
That's right, and I don't think that you're dead right with the Arthur Smith system. Is that Najee Harris is the only member of this offense I think that can really see some gain out of that. So we've seen what he can do with offenses over the years in Tennessee, in Atlanta, and now in Pittsburgh. What he turns those running back cores into, and I think that Harrison Warren as a double punch is an extremely interesting one. I agree. I would temper your expectations on Pickens for sure. But if you've got Freiermuth at tight end,
Oh yeah, fire him up.
no issues there whatsoever.
What do Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson both absolutely love, Chris? The middle of the field. Let's go. Pat Freiermuth.
Absolutely. Start Pat Freiermuth with confidence.
Yeah.
He is absolutely there this week for us.
Yeah, I'd steer away again from the kicker and the Steelers' defense. Just there's probably better options out there. So we'll go over to the Atlanta side of the ball. Yeah, it's going to be Kirk Cousins' first start. He's obviously not done a great deal in the preseason coming back from this Achilles injury. Probably not a guy who was drafted highly in your draft, but a guy that may have been drafted or probably drafted. It's kind of a tricky one, isn't it, Chris? Because on paper, especially being in a like a Kyle Shanahan tree system, which is exactly Kirk Cousins' strengths, it probably was to be a good offense for him. But are you rolling him out here week one, or do you have a bit of hesitancy here?
I've got a bit of hesitancy, but I don't think he's going to be an unbelievably different quarterback to what we saw in Minnesota. I know that injury aside may slow him down, but we saw this many years ago with Kurt Warner, and he became a very fantasy relevant quarterback for some time in Arizona. So I think that the same question marks hanging over Kirk at the same age. Really, I would see how week one goes, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him be a solid, but somewhat inconsistent quarterback, perhaps in a new system. The real question mark for me in this offense, or two question marks, will Bijan ascend to be this absolute fantasy stud that we're expecting to see? And you would have seen in drafts that he's been drafted very high, especially in I don't even say especially in standard leagues. I think in both standard and PPR, because he's got that skill set. But Drake London there as well as wide receiver one, he would have gone quite highly in all your drafts as well. Will Kirk Cousins' impact turn Drake London from the Drake London we've seen over the last couple of years, which has promised so much but delivered comparatively little in fantasy terms, to something that we see in comparison to Justin Jefferson, for example? Will Drake London turn into Justin Jefferson as a result of the quarterback?
It's quite possible. I think it's hard to see a scenario where he's not better than he has been, and he's been usable. He's been flex-worthy player so far in his NFL career. But like you say, Kirk Cousins can take him to that next level. It's just we'll see how high he takes him. Algier, maybe if you're in a deep league, you could have a little bit of appeal there, but obviously we don't know what this running back usage is going to really look like now with this new coaching staff. So I would say don't play him if you've got him. Even in a deep league, you've probably got someone else you can play. And then again, Kyle Pitts, if he's okay and he's out there, absolutely fire him up. But just keep an eye on that hamstring injury. And there's no other tight end beyond him. That's interesting after that. Play coup. And then the Falcons, I think, probably have some streamer appeal as defense this week, to be honest, Chris, because obviously what we've seen from Russell Wilson in the last few years has been great. So if you need an option for defense this week, I think you could probably go to the Falcons.
Yes, I think so.
We'll go to the next game then, which is Arizona against Buffalo. This one's in Buffalo. Let's start off with looking at Buffalo's team here again. Josh Allen, you're absolutely playing him. Obviously, he's not got Stephon Diggs anymore, so the offense isn't necessarily as loaded as it was, but he's still a definite QB1, so just trot him out there and don't think about it. James Cook, again, he obviously came on pretty strongly at the end of last year, so again, you're obviously starting him. He's at least a solid RB2. The receivers are very interesting, Chris, and it might depend on your format whether you want to use any of these guys or not, because I think certainly for week one, I think the only one you would probably look at would be Khalil Shakir, and even then I think you'd need to at least be in a half PPR league to probably consider him, just with the type of receiver he is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're dead right. So there's a lot of guys in that receiver room there for Buffalo who've been fantasy relevant, but fantasy relevant for on the periphery for such a long time. So you look at their outside of Keelan Coleman and Khalil Shakir, but you've got Curtis Samuels there, MVS is there, Matt Collins is there. So there's a lot of guys that could definitely come in and be useful, but that's not necessarily what you're looking for in fantasy. You're looking for that stud number one guy, and at the moment that just isn't there, or at least isn't clear. But you will know that after week one, there'll be some of these guys will still be on waivers in many of you, no doubt. So the Bills are going to be a really interesting offensive look for week one. But many of you, especially if you're in a single tight end league, will have Dalton Kincaid, and I think you've got a lot to look forward to on that one because he's going to get a lot of looks, especially in the red zone. Yeah, especially the zone for that matter, because look at those guys who they've got a receiver, and there's not that many big body dudes. So yeah, he's possibly the one shining light that you can say I will start him with some sort of clarity. But yeah, certainly Allen and Cook, they're as solid as they come. But Josh Allen, do temper expectations this year, I think, because he's been dominant over the last few years in fantasy. Will he have that receiver to be able to do that this year with? We will see.
Yeah, can he evolve to be one of these quarterbacks? Like Brady obviously elevated a lot of guys in his career, a lot of no-name guys, and if you have a gaggle of good receivers that you can spread it around to, that's good for Josh Allen, the quarterback. Not so good if you're trying to play fantasy and trying to play a Bills receiver necessarily each week. But no, you hit the nail on the head. And then Dalton Kincaid, he really could be the top option in this offense. So as you said, you can absolutely play him with confidence. You can play Tyler Bass, and you could probably look at the Bills D. They're not necessarily the best D around, but I think at home they profile to be playing with a lead, so I think you can use them.
I think that Kyler Murray is infinitely sackable as well.
Yeah, he loves to run into a sack. He's not a physical sack, just although he's small enough. Right. And moving on then to Arizona. So Kyler Murray, you can play him as well, by the way. You probably drafted him to play him. So that defense is so bad that he's just going to be chasing points all year long. So yeah, just play him. James Conner, he's going to be the starting running back to lead the year. I think I saw a report today that he's supposedly going to be the bell cow, which is going to be music to anyone's ears who took him sort of in the mid-round of their fantasy draft this year. So he is 29. He has never played a full season, but for the time that he is out there, he's a pretty good running back, Chris. So you can go ahead and absolutely play him this week.
You certainly can. Yeah, I'm all for James Conner. I think he's been the bastion of consistency in fantasy for so long now. And again, he's always good for a touchdown. And if you look at the double-digit points, he somehow sneaks to 10 points more most weeks. So yeah, I think you're dead right. Starting with confidence.
Yeah, and the receiver room, obviously, Marvin Harrison's first game in the NFL. Again, I would fire him up. You drafted him probably in the third, fourth round, something like that, maybe even the second round. So definitely play him. Now, some of the other guys here, like Michael Wilson, maybe could have a bit of intrigue, certainly if they're playing from behind. But again, I would kind of look probably elsewhere than just going straight to that. But if you're in a pinch, you could do worse than Michael Wilson. Trey McBride you can definitely play though, because he's going to be that big underneath option for Kyler Murray while he's throwing deep balls to Marvin Harrison. So all agree with that, Chris?
I do indeed. I think Trey McBride is going to be a really interesting selection this year. There's a lot of interesting tight ends across the league as we've seen, but yeah, he will be a big part of that offense, as you say.
Yeah, you don't want to use the Cardinals defense this week either. Maybe Prater's still the kicker though, right? He must be. You might want to use. He could be okay, but again, there possibly are better options out there for you. We'll go on to the next game then. So we've got Tennessee against Chicago next. So this is a bit of a juicy one, Chris. And Chris is a Tennessee fan, for those of you who don't know, because you won't. But I mean, two young quarterbacks, obviously Caleb Williams in his first start, a new coaching staff in Tennessee as well. We'll start off with the home team with Tennessee, so let's bring them up. Will Levis. It's going to be interesting, Will Levis, because he could be a guy that you could stream this year. I don't think he's a guy you want to play here in week one, Chris, but he could definitely have some fantasy value depending on the matchup this year. The running back room's interesting. Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, it's going to be a committee of sorts. Tony Pollard should be the lead back. And supposedly will be the goal line back. I think he's flex worthy here, probably, Chris. But again, depending on what other options you have, there might be something better out there. I don't know. Spears, again, he's probably a weaker flex if you were looking at playing him. Maybe what's your gut feel on the Titans running back room in week 1?
So this Titans team is going to look very different from the Titans teams of well, certainly in the last 5-6 years, I would say, where Derrick Henry's really been the focal point of the offense. He's got a great arm. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But it's accuracy for him. This really is his. I know he's played a few games last year, but this is his first full year as a starter. It could be quite, as Dave says, it's quite exciting because the running backs will give us an excellent, and I mean excellent, basis. But it's the receiver core that I get quite excited about because yes, Ridley and Hopkins and Tyler Boyd at 3 is the. Are all veterans of the league, granted, and there's no rookies in there. But I think as a comfort blanket for Levis, there you can't really go wrong with that. So yeah, it's going to be a bit, but it's going to be firing on all cylinders, but could potentially be very pickable this year for Levis. And a Congo at tight end, I think there's going to be enough mouths to feed in that offense without including him as well. So, one that both Pollard and Spears can catch from the backfield. So I think it'd be a very similar position with Chicago because they've got the number 1 overall pick in Caleb Williams to great fanfare. Is he going to be this generational talent that we all expect him to be? Or is he going to be a wayward QB to start with arguably a very decent receiving core in DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze? So they've given him every way to succeed and every weapon to succeed. Mm-hmm. Cole Kmet's a decent tight end as well, and then at running back, DeAndre Swift comes in to try and revive his career somewhat because we've seen him over the years in Philly who can be absolutely explosive but needs to stay on the field. So yeah, this is a very, very interesting, I think, fun matchup for week 1. Definitely fire up Swift. I think that's an interesting one. I think definitely fire up DJ Moore. Keenan Allen's a flex. Odunze is probably an outsider in this with a high upside. For the Titans, I certainly wouldn't be starting Levis in this because I think no. There's danger there. So as a result, Chicago Bears defense probably
they're usable. Oh yeah, they're usable in this one. Yeah.
Certainly fire Pollard up. I think Ridley and Hopkins both have value. Certainly Hopkins is a red zone target, and I think Ridley, as probably the wide receiver 1. But it could be quite a spotty offensive output for the Titans. So yeah, for me, I would love to see it, but I think that the Bears probably have this one, especially if Caleb is exactly what we think he might be, which is quite special.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think he could get off to a pretty hot start here. I think if you've got him and you've got, I don't know, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Certainly, I would play him over like a Brock Purdy for sure, those kind of level of guys. I think you could even creep into, there's a debate, maybe you could say, maybe you play him over Jordan Love for week 1, just with the weirdness of playing in Brazil against Philadelphia. So if you've got him and you're stuck at a bit of quarterback, I think you could probably chuck out Caleb Williams there. I'm a bit more bullish on Keenan Allen and the DeAndre Hopkins than you are. I think I'd approach them with a bit more caution. With this Bears receiver core, like you say, DJ Moore's definitely the top dog. He might get shadowed by Snead, but I wouldn't necessarily be too concerned by that. But supposedly the Bears are going to run a lot of 12 personnel this year, which means they're only going to have 2 receivers on the field at a time, which means obviously one of certainly Moore, Allen and Rome Odunze will be sitting down, and it probably isn't going to be DJ Moore. So it's just treat them with caution again, similar to the Titans. Ridley, I think, like you said, Chris, you can definitely have confidence using Ridley. I think that's fine for week 1. He's not an amazing option, but I think he'll do enough. Hopkins, you're right, he absolutely does need a touchdown to probably have a decent day. So again, maybe look elsewhere if you're thinking about Hopkins. But if you're in a pinch, he's a good bet for a touchdown. I think that's pretty much it for Tennessee and Chicago then, Chris. So we go from your team to my team, New England against Cincinnati. New England's going to be quick. Don't play anyone. We're done.
Absolutely not. Not even the defense, I'm afraid.
No.
And usually that's one thing you can dine out on with New England, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Ramondre Stevenson, man, he is wasted in there. He might be the only bright spark in that team, but if you've got him, don't be tempted.
He's a volume-based RB3 is where I would put him. And he might luckily fall into the end zone, especially if the Patriots are getting smoked and it's garbage time. But yeah, just look elsewhere. And for the Bengals, it's kind of the opposite side of the coin. Start Burrow with confidence. The running backs are interesting because we don't necessarily know how this backfield's going to shake out. There's been some interesting reports over the last couple of days saying that Moss is sort of the starter. Brown's going to be in on some special teams stuff. So I don't know if you've got more solid options, I would use them. But again, this is the kind of game where I think you could throw one or either of them out there potentially, depending what your options are. Receiver wise, obviously just play Higgins, and obviously if Chase plays, play him. Tight end, there could be a little bit of appeal for Gesicki, but again, you could probably look somewhere else, look with some better options. Yeah, and then kicker-wise, you can definitely play McPherson, and you absolutely should play the Bengals D if you have them, because they're gonna absolutely troll the Patriots. So, I'm rooting for every team against the Patriots here because I want that first pick, Chris. Because we're not doing anything, so we may as well get the ammo for next year.
Absolutely right. Rebuild, start again.
Yeah, protect Drake May, throw Jacoby Brissett to the Wolves, which is essentially what's going to happen. So. That was quick. We'll go to Houston versus Indianapolis, which is a much more interesting game. CJ Stroud coming off his amazing rookie year. The offense is even more loaded because they've obviously added Stephon Diggs now. Absolutely play CJ Stroud with confidence. Joe Mixon, he's obviously playing for his new team as well in this one. He figures to be, he's going to get all the volume, isn't he, Chris? So you can definitely play him. And then the receivers. Now the receivers are more of an enigma because they're not all going to hit every week. You'd think at least on a given week, at least one, if not two of them are going to hit. Do you have any steer on the Texans receivers here against the Colts?
Well, you're right. So there are 4 guys in there that and Dalton Schultz, of course, who manages to find his way around Texas playing tight end. Nico Collins is definitely the number one, and I would start him. He is as big-bodied, all-round receiver as you can get, and I think that's perfect for this offense right now. And behind that, it's really a question of which of Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs can get themselves above one another. I think Tank Dell had a fantastic rookie year last year, and clearly for fantasy purposes was brilliant. So he got fantastic value out of his draft. But was Diggs hanging around there? It does put that question mark over him. Yes, I think Diggs is probably slowing down as the years go by, but there's no doubt in his quality still. So yeah, I think certainly Nico Collins, start Tank Dell with a little bit of trepidation.
Mm-hmm.
Stephon Diggs at your peril.
I think you've got to play him though. Where you drafted him, you're probably playing him. It's just you're gonna have to live and die from it. In a given, I think it's a tough one because on the one hand, you're like, well, they obviously traded for Stephon Diggs. He's quite vocal, obviously, when he's not being used, how we think he should be being used. So they're going to have to keep him happy. Otherwise, what was the point in getting him? But then equally, you've got this amazing young receiver in Tank Dell who absolutely lit it up in his rookie year last year. You don't want to ignore either. So, yeah, they're all going to produce. It's just like you say, after Collins, it's trying to predict a given week where Dell and Diggs are going to hit is going to be difficult.
scoring's going to be the thing here because you're right, Mixon's not going to go away.
No.
So it's really who can get in that get in the red zone, be that red zone guy. You know, we've seen Schultz be that guy as well. So I'm really worried about for fantasy purposes in this one. I think this is going to be a really interesting offense to watch in real life, but for fantasy purposes, I think it might be able to dilute one another.
Yeah.
Big shout out, by the way, for a guy who's actually called British. I've just seen in there, British Brooks is there as a number, was he 6 running back in the depth chart?
Oh yeah, wow, I've never heard of that guy before.
Never heard of that name before, but fair play. So, and then obviously we move on to the Colts. In much the same way, you know, you've got a very exciting quarterback there, Anthony Richardson, who we saw glimpses of. Well, we saw glimpses of fantasy greatness anyway last year. Until his season ender, but again with that offense, I do wonder where the playmakers outside Jonathan Taylor are going to be. Say Pittman was a very volume based receiver last year, which gave him all of the fantasy value. But outside of him, do you trust Josh Downs? You know, do you trust Adonai Mitchell to step up? Tight ends, we've been pretty hot on this in this rundown so far, but you know I'm not seeing anything there in Granson Malley Cox. You know, I was beat off Malley Cox is a massive dude, but you know this to me strikes of much like the Titans have been over the last few years. It's Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, or bust. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Pittman, again, it's tough to say what he's gonna do. Week 1, you probably where you got him, you might be starting him. You might be lucky to just bench him and see because we're not exactly sure how he's going to be used. But Richardson and Taylor is absolutely, as you say, you can absolutely play him. And then beyond that, yeah, it's kind of tough to say with the Colts. Same goes for the kicker and special teams. You can use Fairbairn, by the way, for the Texans. I'd definitely lean away from the Texans D though, because Richardson could run all over them. So, but yeah, there could be some value that comes from these receivers, or it could be a situation like lesser Texans where it's spread around and none of them really have fantasy relevance. So, but yeah, I think you nailed it, Chris. We'll go on to the next game then, which is Jacksonville against Miami, which could be an absolute boat race. We'll start off with the Jags. Trevor Lawrence, I think you can absolutely fire him up this week as a streamer. Again, paired against a guy like Jordan Love or certainly over a Brock Purdy, I'd absolutely be playing him because their Jacksonville profile to have to keep up with Miami in this one. ETN again, absolutely start him. The receivers again, it gets a bit more interesting because supposedly Thomas and Davis are going to be, the two that start on the field in the normal formations, but Christian Kirk comes in more so when it is a passing down anyway, and obviously he has been sort of the leading receiver of years past. I think you could probably use Christian Kirk in this one, Chris, and maybe Brian Thomas because they figured they need to keep up. I just Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis
is one of those guys that, I mean, he was criminally underrated when he was in Buffalo, for fantasy purposes anyway. He would always chip in with a handy score every now and again, but I just don't think you can start him with any real confidence in this game, I'm afraid. Especially with the guys that are ahead of him on the field. And Evan Ingram, from tight end corner over here, Evan Ingram is dynamic with tight end as well. Yeah. If you really don't have anybody else in the position, then I think particularly in this matchup, this will be a very good one to start him in. But yeah, Miami pose a very stout offense and a very stout opposition in this game because you look there. Yeah, Tua's been solid, but especially in real life, he's been a solid quarterback. To be fair, over the last couple of years, especially in the new offense last year. But you look there, talking about the new offense last year, you don't know which one of Achane and Raheem Mostert might get across the line this year as the number one guy. We saw they both had value last year. Mostert particularly was a real surprise, but it wouldn't be surprising if Achane showing that promise that he showed last year was a bona fide RB1 this year, and then you look at the riches they have at receiver, where you see Tyreek and Waddle, and then they've added Odell as well, whatever that's worth. But it's definitely an interesting lineup, Nate.
Yeah, sure is. Odell's not going to be there, I think, for the start of the season. I'm pretty sure he's on the PUP list or something like that. But like you say, when he gets back there, even then Malik Washington's sort of another interesting third guy that they have. But yeah, I mean, like you said, HM Oster, just they're both startable here. I mean, even some of the other guys could figure in and have some value. Like you say, you're obviously starting Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. Don't worry about tight end. Two is a real interesting one because obviously this offense was amazing last year. They ran in so many touchdowns that Tua wasn't overly fantasy useful. You wonder is that a trend or is there going to be some positive regression there, and does he pass it a bit more? I don't mind taking the gamble here in week 1, depending what you're looking like at quarterback, and saying that he might get a touchdown too, because obviously, Tyreek Hill, they just get the ball in his hands, so he obviously benefits in that regard. But he's not the most elite of QB options here in week 1. Again, if you've got a guy like a Trevor Lawrence, I think even the guy on the other side of the board, I'd be more inclined probably to play Trevor Lawrence here than I would be to the Tagovailoa. It's close though. It's not too far away, but. And then kicker-wise, you can use Jason Sanders again. He's a little bit like Jake Elliott with the Eagles, where they do tend to go for it on fourth a bit, but I think he's a bit more usable. I'd probably avoid both defenses here if I could, though.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's go on to the next one. So we're going to the NFC South now. Carolina against New Orleans. This could be just an absolute car crash of the games. It could be great, it could be terrible, it could be anything. It can be all of that. And it's just we'll start with the Panthers because it'll probably be quick. Is there anyone on the Panthers, Chris, you have any interest of in week 1 from a fantasy perspective?
It's a difficult one to pick. I certainly have no interest in any of their receivers. I think Bryce Young would be a absolute desperation to start, but you don't need to in week 1. I think Chuba Hubbard might be an interesting one at running back because he's going to be used an awful lot. But again, that matchup and where it is, I'm not feeling that. You really would have to be pretty desperate there, especially in 2 running back leagues, because assuming that you've got someone who's been drafted higher up, you will never need to start that. When it comes to the Saints, there's some obvious starts here, I think, in Chris Olave. I think you're going to be starting Alvin Kamara if you've got him. Yeah. If you are playing a tight end league, Taysom Hill is a very, very interesting option because, again, we don't know how he's going to be used, but what we do know is that he's going to be used. So he is someone who doesn't go away, and obviously they like to utilize what skills he has. And if you got him in the tight end position, and he ends up throwing or ends up doing something
catching, running, all of the above.
Exactly. Runs in for a touchdown. You've got some real value there. I think Rashid Shaheed again is one of those guys on the periphery too. But again, I don't have any faith in that offense to be able to withstand 2 fantasy relevant receivers. And as much as I want them to have that, again, Kamara's got a question mark as well in his usage. Is he really the guy that was winning leagues for you, 3 or 4 seasons ago, or is he a guy that is there on name only? And I think that I don't want him to be, because I've done so well with him over the years.
Yeah, he's a good running back, but it's just a bad situation in profiles to be, doesn't it? And the problem is, like you say with Taysom Hill sort of suck his value away from everybody else in this. If Taysom Hill didn't exist, I think you've got no problem with Kamara, you've got no problem with Olave, and Shaheed's arguably usable. Yeah, certainly usable. But because Taysom Hill exists, and I love Taysom Hill, as Chris knows, it kind of affects everybody else and makes it exactly as you say. So, yeah, no, I think you got it. By the way, if you're in a 12-team league or above, someone should absolutely be starting Taysom Hill this week. I firmly believe that because they've been talking him up a lot this year. So if you're not kind of, locked in with one of these great tight ends, just go and get Taysom Hill and thank us later. That's probably pretty much it for this game, Chris, unless you've got anything else.
I think so, yeah. So the next game we've got is Minnesota versus the Giants.
Yep.
And again, this is one we can rattle through pretty quickly because, we'll start with the Vikings. The big off-season things that Cousins goes. They're drafting rookie quarterbacks, and then their entire world collapses.
As does your desk.
As does my desk, unfortunately. Yeah. And Sam Darnold manages to parachute his way in to save the franchise once again. I'm not sure that that's going to be an unbelievably good move there, and it does make things difficult for Justin Jefferson, who we've seen over the years has been, or over the last three seasons has been league winners for most of you. Jordan Addison, who's had real value too, but I just don't see that as much this year. Obviously, they're both still, especially Justin Jefferson, obviously an elite receiver, but with a less than elite quarterback, and that only plays into the hands of defenses that play them. And by the way, I wouldn't start the Giants this week. And and Aaron Jones, who manages to put himself in a position again where he's going to be a high volume running back, but again, on the edges of where we should be starting them. And at tight end, there really isn't anything to write home about with TJ Hawkinson on PUP. So it's going to be a pretty difficult offensive. Position that the Vikings will find themselves in. Having said that, talking about offensive positions that are pretty difficult, the New York Giants, oh my word. Daniel Jones comes back against all odds, and really the only thing that's of any use in there is whether Malik Neighbors is any good at this level or not. Aside from that, I'm really down on any of those guys. If you got Devin Singletary, don't start him. If you got any other Giants offensive player, probably best not to start him. And even if you got anyone else other than Malik Neighbors, I'd probably not go for it this week to see where they shake out. But again, he's a dice throw for me this week, Nate.
Yeah, no, I think your dice throw is the word, Neighbors, because he could be great. I mean, this does sort of profile to be a good game for him because the Vikings D isn't that special, really. But, it's Daniel James' first game back after his injury. And it's obviously Neighbors' first game in the NFL. So, yeah, if you've got a reasonable option, a fairly consistent, safe option, you might want to go with that over Neighbors, who could end up costing you the week. The next game then, again, shouldn't take too long yet. We got Las Vegas Raiders against the LA Chargers. So if we start off with the Raiders, Chris, again, their quarterbacks aren't in play here. Zamir White, he's an absolute volume play. If you need a running back this week or you've not got anything better at flex, but he's definitely not the sexiest option here in this one. Devontae Adams, I think you can play. We'll obviously see what he looks like with another quarterback, but he should be fine. I probably wouldn't look to play Myers. Maybe if you're in like a full PPR league, he could have some value, but not here for week one. Brock Bowers is the interesting one. I think he's got a little bit of an injury thing at the moment, but it's sounding like he should play, and I know you're pretty high on him, Chris.
I do. Yeah. I am. I absolutely love the look of him. I think in any other offense, he would be a really interesting start. He has use immediately, but again, it's quarterback play, and I think for a guy like him, who's an absolute physical freak and specimen, red zone opportunities will come, but maybe not initially.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. Yeah, I wouldn't look for Brock Bowers here in week one either. Moving over to the Chargers again, the interesting thing here is everyone is fading Justin Herbert, and I know it's been a difficult time in him for LA. Certainly the last season was. Against the Raiders here in week one, I know the defense is a little better. Does he have any interest here for you? As maybe it would be as a back end streamer, but you know, I know the receiving core is a bit depleted with Keenan Allen obviously going and Michael Williams as well. But he's still got Josh Palmer there. They've got an interesting rookie in Lad McConkey, and they signed Hayden Hurst at the tight end. Is there any possible interest in Herbert here?
It's a great Roman offense, Nath. So I think if there's any Ravens fans out there that are now shouting at their speaker, going, no, so he was holding us back all these years. Look, Kellen Moore was great for Justin Herbert. I'm not sure Greg Roman's going to be unbelievable for him. I think it's going to be very run heavy. And as you say, there's no outwardly, outwardly number one receiver there. I think they've all got. Have they got interest? Not even sure that they do.
One of them I could see having a good game, but it's just picking the one that out of McConkey, Palmer, even Quentin Johnson, DJ Chark. I think you could throw in there as well. It's going to be really. I think the only one you can probably set your watch by in this one is Gus Edwards, like you say, with the run heaviness. I think he's actually a good option for this week one. I think J.K. Dobbins should be playing, but again, he's obviously coming off yet another injury, so he's not necessarily going to be free up to speed. But again, if you've got stronger options, go that way. But I think Gus Edwards is probably usable here. Beyond that, I don't think there's much else interest here, is there, Chris?
No, it's a shame. Justin Herb's got himself in a position where he's obviously got talent.
Yeah,
immense amount of talent. Just in the wrong place.
Yeah. We'll look at Denver, Seattle now. Again, with Denver at week one, obviously it's another rookie quarterback in Bo Nix. You're not looking to start him. Again, there's some guys there who might have some fantasy interest. Cortland Sutton possibly, but I'm not sure there's really one here for week one, Chris. And then the running back room as well. I kind of want to see how this shakes out before you really commit to a guy. Javonte Williams supposedly going to be the lead dog. But supposedly as well, at one point in the season, he nearly got cut from, or was close to getting cut from the team. So, is there anything on the Broncos side of the ball that you're interested in here?
There really isn't for me. I think Cortland Sutton's one of the most frustrating players in fantasy football because he's got all the skill set and none of the payback. For me, you're dead right. The running back one of the running backs might have value because they're going to be the safety net for Bo Nix, but you can't start with any of those Denver players with any sort of security. If you've got anybody else on your roster who can go in ahead of them, I would do that.
Seattle's a bit of a different story though, because I think Geno, he's definitely usable here as a streamer. Again, he's a guy that I'd play ahead of the likes of Brock Purdy. I'd probably even play him over, again, maybe like a Jordan Love. You could use that example. Certainly over the likes of like Baker Mayfield, and he's probably up near the sort of Caleb Williams for me. He's could be a top 12 quarterback here in week one, I think, because they've got a new offense, as you have a new offensive coordinator, as you've mentioned to me before, Chris. So I think DK Metcalf should be a stud here in week one. Tyler Lockett's supposedly going to be back as well. I don't know. Is he someone you'd have a bit of confidence in, or would you rather lean Jackson Smith and Jigba?
I think Jackson Smith and Jigba is probably in the ascendancy now. As you quite rightly say, with a new head coach, new OC, just a new way of thinking, away from the Pete Carroll era. I think the shackles might well come off of Seattle this year, and for me they're woefully underrated because I think in every position, offensively anyway, we're looking at some real quality. So yeah, we've seen Geno can definitely hold his own, but Kenneth Walker's there at running back, who is extremely exciting when he's on the field. He's just got to stay healthy.
Start him. Yeah,
absolutely start him. If you've got him, he is electric. And then Metcalf and Jigba and Lockett as a three. Again, I think that's a very solid three, and especially with Metcalf being the physical phenom that he is, and Jackson Smith and Jigba being in the ascendancy, and Lockett being as solid as it gets in fantasy, or at least has been in time. I wouldn't start him for now. I want to see how that shakes out, but certainly start DK. Certainly start Smith and Jigba as a flex if you've got him. I would say Walker's a start, and Geno is a stream and start for sure. Yeah,
you can play Maya as a kicker for the Seahawks too, and I think the defense is even in play here. Bo Nix in his first NFL start. I think that's a fair gamble worth taking. We've got Dallas and Cleveland next. Again, this should be a quite exciting game on the Sunday slate. Dak Prescott, you're playing him. Look, CD only did just sign his contract a week or so ago, but he's going to be back in there. He's not the most elite option, I don't think, Chris, but he's certainly a QB1, certainly a guy you should be starting. CeeDee Lamb, you're obviously starting. Again, there's the slow start concerns. Does Brandon Cooks have any possible flex appeal here for you?
I think he does.
Yeah.
I think he does. I am debate. It's debatable whether this Cowboys offense is going to be any good, or at least relevant this year. I think on paper, Lamb and Cooks is a great 1-2. But to me this matchup screams defensive matchup, and I think in other games that's potentially it, but I think in this one it could be uphill sledding, but certainly as the season goes on, I think if you can snag him to your roster, I certainly would.
Yep. That's all good analysis. Kicker-wise, Brandon Aubrey, he's obviously amazing. Play him. Either of the defenses, I think the Cowboys defense you could definitely play here.
Yeah.
We'll look at Cleveland now. Deshaun Watson, don't play him. There are many reasons I can tell you to don't play him, but I'll stick to fantasy ones, so don't play him. Jerome Ford, he's probably just like a volume-based flex here, I'd say, Chris. If you want to go with something more high upside, don't go his way. But he's got a floor, I think, in this one, hasn't he?
Very, very difficult first game for him to sort of come in. Yeah, he's going to be nice and healthy and whatnot, but yeah, I think the key word that you mentioned there is volume. Yeah, that's what you can see off.
And outside of that, I mean, I'm not sure there's a great. I think David Njoku you could look at as an option. He's a reasonable tight end option here, and we're gone. Cooper, I have a lot of worries about here because he's going to get the Diggs treatment.
For sure.
And Watson's been supposedly dealing with this shoulder arm soreness again. Obviously, he's not looked the same elite quarterback that he did when he was in Houston since he's been in Cleveland. So I would be tempted if I had other options. It sounds mad because Cooper's such a stud receiver. But if you've got somewhere else you could go, I'd probably lean away from Cooper. Do you think that's a fair take, Chris?
Yeah, certainly fair in this. We've seen Deshaun Watson be misfiring for 2 seasons now. And I think if you misfire against the Cowboys D, it's bad news. Yeah. And that's bad news for yours too.
Yeah. Cool. So that's that one. We're going to Washington, Tampa Bay now. So again, we've got another rookie quarterback. Let's start with the Washington side of the ball, Jaden Daniels. I think where you drafted him in your draft, because he was sort of the premier later round option. If you decided to wait on quarterback, I think I'd probably trot him out there in week 1. I don't think he's necessarily is guaranteed to hit some of the other streamers like potentially Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith, but if you want to use him, I think you can do in this week. Did you agree with that, Chris?
I think that the Commanders generally are going to be quite resurgent. I like the fact that their institutional weirdness that they've got, or they had, has been completely cleared out, and they decided to go for an entirely new slate, new head coach, new OC, and we see that in Cliff Kingsbury, what he can bring to the table. It's going to be a dynamic offense, and Jaden Daniels being in the middle of that can only help. This is certainly a dice roll for anyone in playing him in fantasy this week, because no one really knows what it's going to be. But he's going to have all the weapons around him. So I like the fact that the 2 running backs are quite dynamic in Robinson and Eckler. I think Robinson is probably the start here, and we shouldn't be too worried about Eckler initially. But the key thing, and we've seen amongst the chaos the Commanders have had over the last 20 years, is Terry McLaurin's value this year, because I think that in this offense, he could be the real beneficiary of that and be real draft value. whilst in the last few years he's been played in dysfunction, he's still been fantasy relevant. This year, even more so. I think that he could be take that next step up the chain.
Definitely, I think Daniels should be the best quarterback he's ever played with, and I think, unlike when Dotson was there, more so in his rookie year, I think there's enough receiving talent there that other defenses aren't just going to lock in on McLaurin completely, but not quite so much that it's going to result in more target competition and things like that. So yeah, I completely agree with your point there.
Yeah, and I don't think there's much at tight end there as well. I know.
No, yeah, someone in our league of record is particularly a big fan of Ben Sinnott, but I've seen that Zach Ertz is the top of the depth chart at the moment, and he's obviously played with Kingsbury before in Arizona. So yeah, I'd not consider one of those guys for week one.
No.
Tampa Bay, what do you make of Tampa Bay for usable options here in week one?
Well, Tampa Bay is middle of the road as it gets this year, I think, and it's certainly for a real life team. So Baker did it very well last year with absolutely no expectation down there, and clearly with the lack of pressure and again lack of institutional weirdness that you get in Cleveland, really flourished, and as a result can carry receivers. Say Chris Godwin had a down year last year, but Mike Evans continued his quest for the Hall of Fame with another 1,000+ yard this season, and I don't think there's any reason to think that he might not do it again, because a lot of the things that are in place, albeit except for offensive coordinator, has remained the same. So you see that Rashad White's still there, Godwin's still there with him. I think that this team could be one of those sneaky ones that allow a lot of fantasy relevant players out of it, especially now as the division is quite weak.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, definitely, absolutely. Certainly in week one, White's as solid as they get, and like you say, Evans, just play him. Godwin, he's sort of on the borderline. Didn't have the best of seasons last year, but supposedly they're moving him back more in towards the slot, but Baker kind of likes to chuck it downfield, so he could have some relevance. It might be a good week because the Washington defense obviously isn't the best around, and again, Baker maybe has some weak sleeper appeal, but I think you've probably got better options available there. Kicker and D-wise, you could maybe go the Tampa defense, just a rookie in his first start. You could maybe look at that way, but beyond that, I wouldn't say either are particularly good options. We'll go to Sunday Night Football now. We've got the Los Angeles Rams taking on Detroit, the Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford revenge game. It's a revenge off, Chris. We'll start off with Detroit. I mean, they could just come out and absolutely light it up. Let's not forget Aaron Donald is now retired. This Rams defense isn't what it was. So I think Goff is certainly a streamer, if not, back end top 12 starter in his own right. Gibbs, you should definitely be playing. Amon Roy should be playing. Sam Laporta as well should definitely be playing if you've got him. It's more about the guys like David Montgomery, and then if there's any other receiver like Jameson Williams that have any interest. We've spoken about David Montgomery between ourselves a bit, and just where Jahmyr Gibbs had this ascendancy last year, I don't really understand why Montgomery's quite as popular as now. It's going to be a great offense, the Detroit's offense, but he lost a lot of value where he started to share the goal line role with Jahmyr Gibbs. And he gets some yards in the short yardage stuff, but it's really about Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, I think he should be a flex here in week one against the Rams. Chris, am I crazy for down trading him for as much as I am?
No, I don't think so. I think a flex is exactly where he belongs. If you're a two RB starter, you might be tempted, because I think that you've seen the value to him last year falling across the goal line. But you can't knock what Gibbs did in the second half of the season, and I think it's a big risk if you've got other guys around him to do that. Can they maintain two running backs in the same way that Green Bay have done in years gone by? We've seen that as a certainly fantasy relevant thing, sure, but I think that one will take away from another too much. It's just they clearly want Gibbs to be that guy there for longevity's sake. And much the same thing you could talk about with Jameson Williams, because again, someone who's flashed brilliance over the last few years but just can't stay on the field.
Yeah.
And again, we've seen him go in later parts of drafts. especially in that offense, he could be really valuable. Down the, I say not even down the stretch, say just to start with, because say we saw that with Cleve Raymond a little bit last year too. Yeah, I think that this team can definitely withstand two receivers, especially now as Amon Ra is a marked man.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think again maybe a little bit too early to start him, but certainly if you've got him on your roster or if he's out there on waivers, go and pick him up.
Oh yeah, definitely someone you definitely want on your team for sure. Yeah, and then on the Rams side of the ball, I mean Stafford. This Detroit defense is pretty good. They're not like necessarily amazing. They're pretty good. I don't know really if he's. I think there's probably better streaming options here in week 1 than Stafford. And Kyren Williams, you should obviously be playing again. We'll see how much Corum maybe eats into the role, but he's still a starter. Again, Puka and Cooper Cup. You're obviously playing. That's pretty much it. I think the Rams side of the ball is pretty cut and dry, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I think that this Rams team isn't going to be very special this year at all. They're going to need to throw a lot, and they'll be playing from behind a lot as well.
Yeah.
I worry for Kyren Williams a little bit, but I don't worry about the receivers. I think the receivers have standalone value in fantasy for sure.
Yeah. Cool. And then we get the final game of the week then, Monday Night Football, New York Jets against the San Francisco 49ers. Ooh. Let's start with the Jets. Aaron Rodgers, take 2 in a Jets uniform. Hopefully he lasts more than 4 snaps this time. Although the guy that sacked him on the play where he snapped his Achilles, he is now on the Niners in a cruel twister fade, so that could be all-time meme potential, though we obviously hope that doesn't happen. But he's not an option here in week 1. There are definitely better streamers. Like, he needs to wind back the clock a bit to the Aaron Rodgers world to be, I think, fantasy relevant consistently again. And yeah, on the road to the Niners in week 1, certainly, isn't it? Who you should absolutely use. You draft him to use him again. Garrett Wilson, again, you can use him. I think for the Jets, that's probably about it. With the defense, I try and get away from them as well. You may have drafted them, but they're not probably the best option here. Do you think that's fair, Chris?
I certainly think that's fair this week. I think the Jets are going to be very situational this year. There's going to be some guys you can deploy in certain matchups, especially in their division as well. I think Rodgers has value later on in the season, but certainly not in this matchup, as you suggest. And yeah, Hall and Wilson are absolutely streets ahead. Mike Williams will have some value, I think, as well. I think
across the season, yeah.
Across the season,
yeah, definitely.
But in this matchup, it's a very difficult one for them to start with, and as you say, with Aaron Rodgers not being particularly well tested over the last 12 months. It's very difficult to have any sort of reason why you trust him in this matchup. For the 49ers, as I say, we saw Purdy ascend to being a fantasy relevant quarterback last year. He's a much better real life quarterback. You watch the games and say his awareness and what he does for that offense, especially now. Kyle Shanahan's been there for so long and has that system running so well there. I don't think outside of that system, maybe he's as useful. But one thing that you can say is that by having him there, it brings guys like McCaffrey and Debo to life, and George Kittle to life. More to the point, actually, because if you've got him at tight end, you'd feel really good with him and Purdy together. They seem to have a wonderful understanding. As we talked about earlier in the show, say Brandon Ayuk signed his contract. It's strange to think that as the number 2 receiver, he's probably the 4th best option in their offense. But there was room for him last year with all of that going on. So I think that you can definitely you would obviously start McCaffrey because you'd have picked him number 1 overall probably, and you start Debo and Kittle and Ayuk in this game. Outside of that, Purdy is for me probably not starting for you this week. There's much better options streaming across the league. And everybody else there offense-wise isn't worth it. No,
yeah, agreed. Like, one of these guys, I think, for the Niners is going to disappoint. It's not going to be McCaffrey, but, it's quite possible one of Samuel Ayuk and Kittle doesn't do well. I think with everyone healthy, Kittle may be the odd man out more often than not, but, as a tight end option, he's obviously still fine. But other than that, I think you nailed it. And then you can use Jake Moody, the kicker for the Niners, and then I think you can still play the San Fran D as well. Rodgers is going to have some rust to knock off, I think. So, and crossing the country and stuff, I think you can I think.
Yeah, that's right. I like Greg the Leg in this one for the Jets as well.
Oh yeah. He can have some.
He stopped.
Yeah.
And I think that Zerline's a perfectly good option in this as well. If you've got him kicking, feel free to fire up the leg.
Do it. And that is it for the week's previews. We're going to go to our Kings and Peasants segment now. Me and Chris are going to tell you who our favourite Kings are of the week, the guys who are maybe ranked a little low or who we think are going to have a really good day, and then our Peasants guys who are sort of ranked highly, who we think are going to have a bad day. So without further ado, let's do the Kings. I'll start off with my Kings this week, if you don't mind, Chris. Starting at quarterback of the Kings for Nathan, we've got Jared Goff. A running back, that's the revenge game, by the way. A running back, we've got Jerome Ford. I think he's going to be a fairly good running option. He could possibly fall into the end zone. He's a guy you probably took late in your draft, so if you need an option for someone who should deliver a reasonable result, it's him. T. Higgins, I'm sort of receiver. I'm sorting baking into this that Chase probably isn't going to play a full amount of snaps, but they're going to slap the Patriots anyway. So Higgins should have a good day. Tight end, you are absolutely rolling out Taysom Hill as a king. He is going to score in week 1. Mark my words. Love that dude. Cameron Dicker at kicker. Love Dicker the kicker. He should have a pretty decent day. Just got a nice hefty new contract there as well. And then the Bengals D again, just to really drill at home that the Patriots are going to have a difficult week this week. That's it for my Kings. So Goff, Ford, Higgins, Hill, and Dicker and Bengals. Who have you got, Chris?
So team king for me. Jalen Hurts, absolutely Samba king this week. Goes to Brazil, stakes his claim. Wonderful. I think it's a great game, that one there. Kenneth Walker, running back. AJ Brown is gonna ball out in Brazil. Pat Fryermuth is going to be the ultimate, and I mean ultimate, comfort blanket for Russell Wilson. Greg Zuerlein's going to kick the Jets to some sort of I don't think they're going to win, but they'll do better. And Chicago Bears defense on Kings as well, because I think that Will Levis could be a pick machine.
Cool. So your Kings are Hurts, Walker, Brown, Fryermuth, Zuerlein, and the Bears. Okay, let's see who our Peasants of the week are.
Ah, you filthy peasant.
I wish you could hear the peasant jingle, Chris. It's beautiful. You're going to enjoy that whenever you listen to it back. But my peasant for the week at quarterback is Brock Purdy. He's probably going to allow players around him to have a good day, but as a guy who's fairly highly ranked, I can't see himself having an amazingly good day. Ramondre Stevenson, we've already spoken about that. He's not going to have a good day. I wouldn't even be convinced he's going to get a ton of volume in this one. Amari Cooper, spoke about that a bit earlier as well. He's going to get erased by Diggs, I think, so he's on the peasant team for me this week. George Kittle as well, I mentioned in the 9 section, one of these guys is probably going to miss out. I think in week 1 it's probably going to be him. Jake Elliott as well, the Eagles just love going for it on 4th too much. And they don't like taking those field goals when they can get a first down. And then the Ravens defense against the Chiefs, you just don't want to inflict that upon yourself. So Purdy, Stevenson, Cooper, Kittle, Elliott, and the Ravens D are my peasants of the week. Chris, who are your peasants?
Well, I say team peasant. Deshaun Watson is definitely peasant in chief this week. I think he's going to get rolled over by the Cowboys. Unfortunately for Ramondre, he makes my peasant team as well, because I think there's going to be very slim pickings there. Michael Pittman, I'm down on him. I'd say he was volume based with a quarterback that could throw last year. I think we're going to find that he's probably going to be very different this year. Trey McBride's a bit of an outsider one. I think that Arizona might struggle on the road, but I can see why that one will be a bit of a controversial pick.
Yeah, bold, like it.
But Evan McPherson, I think, is going to score extra points only.
Yeah.
They're going to score so many touchdowns that he's not going to score massive points and field goals. And of course, the New England Patriots defense, who, well, this is a chastening one for me, because I didn't think they'd ever drop this far. But
the defense itself is good. It's just the offense is that bad that it doesn't really matter how good the defense is.
Exactly, that's right. It's not the quality of the players. It's just the situation they find themselves in. So peasant team of the week for me: Watson, Ramondre Stevenson, Michael Pittman, Trey McBride, Evan McPherson, and the Patriots defense.
There you go. So we're going to add up the score from our Kings and then subtract the score of our peasants to see who has the highest net score on the week. We'll track it each week and obviously visit on the recap show as well. Yeah, we'll see whose advice is better. That nearly brings us to the end of the show, Chris, but we've got one more bit of fun before we get there. We're going to play 20 questions. So, yeah, let's get into it. 20 questions. You can't hear it, but you felt the jauntiness of that jingle.
I felt it. That's all about it.
Yeah, you felt it through the air. So, yeah, I have a player who I have found for you, Chris, of fantasy relevance. You have 20 questions and a guess to figure out who said player is. You can only guess once, though, so if you choose to guess early, the game's over at that point, regardless if you get it right or not. I will only answer with simple yes and no's. So choose your questions wisely, and I'll obviously keep track and let you know how many questions you've got.
Absolutely. So let's start. And by the way, if anyone at home, if you get this before I do, just do let us know.
Yeah, please.
What
Yeah.
you got it in, so because there'll be somebody who gets it within, no doubt. Okay, so question number 1: AFC or NFC?
I need to answer with a yes or no question, Chris.
AFC.
No. Though bear in mind players can play for multiple teams, but you're lucky that the answer is still no.
Okay, there we go. NFC it is. Question 2 then. Is it an offensive player?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Is it East Coast?
No.
Is it West Coast?
No.
Oh. Do they play in Texas?
No, they do not play in
No.
Texas.
Okay. So I think we're at question.
This isn't necessarily an active player as well, by the way. I didn't mention that point. It
Okay.
could be, it might not be.
Are they still playing?
No.
NFC offensive and no. Don't play in Texas is neither East Coast nor West Coast. Okay. Has this player played in our lifetimes?
Yes.
6.
That was question number 7, by the way.
7. There you go.
Sorry, I forget. I meant to let you know at 5.
Okay. Does this player play at wide receiver?
Yes.
NFC offensive wide receiver who's played in our lifetime. Okay.
Not on the East Coast, West Coast, or from Texas.
Or from Texas. Does this player play in the north of the United States for his team?
Yes.
Does this player play in Wisconsin?
No. That's 10.
Ugh. Well, halfway through. Okay. Does this player play for the Vikings?
No.
We're gonna go around all the Northern.
Halfway down.
No. Doesn't play for Green Bay and doesn't play for the Vikings. Okay. Is a receiver. Has this player played for only NFC teams?
Yes.
Does this player play for Detroit?
Yes. I think he's onto something.
There isn't an active player.
They are not, no.
We've already established that. Is this player in the Hall of Fame?
They are in the Hall of Fame, yes.
Excellent. And with the 15th
that was only 14 questions.
Yeah.
I believe.
Well, this is it. This is my guess at 15.
You're gonna guess, okay? Yeah.
Is it Calvin Johnson?
It is Calvin Johnson. You got it. Well done.
There we go.
You got the very first 20 questions. Yeah. Had to be someone extremely, extremely well-renowned in both NFL and fantasy circles for the first 20 questions here. Calvin Johnson was an absolute dude when he played, wasn't he, Chris?
What a guy. Won some leagues for people in this, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he completely lit it up necessarily from day one, but I mean, he was always really highly regarded. Just the size, speed combination that he had. Certainly when Matthew Stafford got there, you know, Detroit at that time is not the Detroit we know today. This ultra vibing Dan Campbell side, really good, you know, on both sides of the ball. They were pretty terrible back then. They actually went 0-16. I think it was 2008, wasn't it, Chris? When Calvin Johnson was even on the team then. But the dude was just an absolute machine, whether the team was good or not, whether Stafford was injured there or not. We've just got up on the screen here. He scored over 200 fantasy points multiple times in his career. I think did he set the receiving record with 1964? I can't remember. Yeah, it was insane. Yeah, he would have been, I think, the first receiver to go over 2K. He just had some absolutely insane seasons. He retired quite young as well. He retired in 2015, so he only played from 2007 to 2015. I think he was only, I'm trying to remember how old. Oh, he's 38 now, so he would have only been like 29, 30 at the time. It's definitely young, but even by NFL standards.
Absolutely.
But I mean, he's already in the Hall of Fame because you asked that as a question. But that's just how transcendent a talent he was, and man, what he probably wouldn't give to play on this Detroit team nowadays.
Oh wow, can you imagine? Yeah, and that's right. And you know, it's such a shame that we didn't ever get to see him in winning teams. But you know, the quality was there, and yeah, I mean, a modern day legend. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
In the same way as it seems to be in Detroit. Yeah, their legends retire early. Whether that be Barry Sanders or whether that be Megatron.
Yep.
Couple of dudes there.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so well done, Chris. You got the 20 questions, so that's 1-0 to you. I'm up next week. So that is it for the first episode of the LOC Fantasy Show, though. So we hope you enjoyed it. We obviously hope it helps with your team selections this week. You got anything you want to add, Chris?
No, I say this has been a new experience for Nathan and I today, but I hope that you've stuck with us and hopefully you've got something out of it. And say if you enjoy what we do, or if you have any feedback of what we can do better, we would love to hear from you. So yeah, I mean, Nathan, have you got the contact details?
Yeah, so you can email. That's a good point. Yeah, I've mentioned that once. locfantasyshow@gmail.com is the email if you want to email us. You can find us on X as well. We've got an X account. I created a Reddit account, but I haven't created a subreddit yet. We're on Facebook. There's a Facebook page. There will be an Instagram account, but Instagram is seemingly broken at the moment for making new accounts, so that's not ideal. And we also have a TikTok. All the socials are either LOC Fantasy Show, one word. I think the TikTok is loc.fantasy.show. So yeah, reach out whatever you want. But absolutely, if you've got a submission for 20 questions or a question you want us to ask for the previews or anything like that, just pop it on over to locfantasyshow@gmail.com. If you've not got anything else, Chris, I will simply say thank you for joining me on the podcast. And to you, the listener, have a good rest of your week. Enjoy the opening game. Have a great weekend when you get there. Best of luck in your fantasy matchup this week, unless you're playing me, of course. Goodbye, everybody.